Hello. Welcome to another episode of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. Each week we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season we're going to be focusing on horror subgenres and how they've changed over time. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks for listening. So we're in week 2 of our mini-series about cults, or rather horror movies about cults. And last week was kind of weird. This week's movie was just an adventure, was it not?
You can say that again.
Yeah. This one. So the reason we chose this movie is because we read that it was a cult film about cults starring a future cult member, which is a pretty good description of the movie.
Yes.
But it did not quite convey how off the rails this one was from a storyline perspective. Mm-hmm. But all that said, I do think that there are some interesting things, especially comparing them to The Black Cat that we watched last week, as far as like how cults are projected in film and what's being brought out as like scary about them as, time and culture progress. So usually we start off these episodes by kind of giving some larger context or, connecting it to the last movie about how it fits into, the progression of this type of horror movie over time. But I think this week we might be better off just kind of working our way through what we need to with the movie and then coming back to that.
Well, maybe for you. I actually didn't think it was that bad.
Okay. Well,
one of those guys.
Good. I am glad we will have opposing viewpoints, but we can...
I didn't think it was that bad.
But we can get through the parts of this that matter, I think, pretty quickly and not spend too much time dunking on it, and then come back and talk about some of the stuff that, fits into kind of our larger story about cult movies and cults and how they are portrayed in horror movies over time.
Sounds great.
Cool. So I will do a quick introduction, and then you can do your fun facts, and then we can get into the completely inexplicable plotline details. In 1975, Bryanston Distributing Company brought us The Devil's Reign, a supernatural horror film about a timeless curse that binds an ancient cult to a man and his wife who dared to defy them. This movie has an ensemble cast that included William Shatner, Ernest Borgnine, and John Travolta, and it credits an actual Satanist as its technical advisor. Despite the star power and Satanism, though, this movie was universally despised by critics and reportedly holds a place on Roger Ebert's list of most hated movies. If all that doesn't scare you off, it can be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
Or free on Tubes.
Was it on Tubes?
Yeah, dude.
Man, when I looked for it, anyway.
Well, okay. Just for the record, here's a fact for the damn movie and Tubi. It wouldn't show up until I typed the full name in when I was searching.
Oh, interesting.
Normally you could do like devil. And it would show up. It would show like a bunch of them. Now, granted, it could have been like on the page, but there was like 100 of them. Mm-hmm. I couldn't get it to specifically show until I searched exact name, and then it came up.
Interesting. Well, shame on me. I think free is the appropriate amount of money to pay for this movie.
Maybe that's why I don't think it's as bad. Yeah, I didn't have to pay. Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you learn about this one?
So there are two things I learned, which I didn't realize initially. Well, no, that's not true. I forgot. So John Travolta's in this film. He plays Danny in this film, and I went back trying to find him.
Yeah, I was going back through too. I was trying to find pictures of the character Danny to see if I could figure out like who it was, and it, as far as I could tell, it was just random pictures of other cult people.
Yeah, I guess a couple, but I'll just leave it at this last one, which I think kind of explains it. There was a movie that we had done before, and it was rumored to be funded by mob money, by money from the mafia. And it wasn't like the greatest quality. God, I can't even remember which one it was. If it was like the one that was based on like Son of Sam, I can't remember. But we've done it, and it was kind of similar quality of film. Anyway, with this one, supposedly it was financed by the mafia. I've read multiple things saying it was, but that was actually delivered by Ernest, who played the main Satanist in this.
Wait, you're saying like he started the rumor?
He confirmed the rumor.
Oh,
2010. Okay. Yeah, and he actually said he never was paid for it.
So, but did they owe him a favor?
I mean, I think it would be like a good question to ask, like, hey, who is this movie funded by? And if they're like, hey, a legal organization, you'd be like, I might not do this because I might not get paid.
Yeah. But if the mafia owes you a favor, I mean, that's worth a lot. You could even say priceless. So maybe he had some debt. You never know.
That's true, actually. He could have.
I could see him being a gambler.
Oh, I bet he was. Yeah. I guarantee he was. You don't look like that and not be a gambler.
Yeah, exactly.
You gambled on yourself just to get into the film industry being that ugly. I'm just kidding. I'm just trying to be ugly. I know.
Save it for the plot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this movie starts and you're just right in the middle of something. And like, I never thought I would say this, but this movie would have benefited from some kind of setup at the beginning to orient you to the story and give you some sense of who the characters were. Mm-hmm. Yes, longtime listeners, I also am shocked by my opinion, but I think this movie should have been longer.
Yeah, I actually thought Tubi was even more messed up because I was like, I 100% missed something.
Yeah, like, I 10 minutes in, I went back to the beginning thinking maybe it had accidentally started somewhere not at the beginning.
Yeah. Dude, I was 9 minutes, so it was like 9 minutes some change in, I promise. And I went back because it was like a little over 3 minutes where the credits ended. And I was like, no, like I watched, like I thought, like, was I on my phone? Like, what did I do? But no, it just gets you right into it.
Yeah.
From the get-go.
And there was a ton of stuff even beyond that, like once you kind of got situated in what was happening, that just did not make any sense whatsoever. And even going back to it now, there were some things that I read on the Wikipedia page, and I'm like, there's no evidence whatsoever for this in the movie. Like the character Tom, in Wikipedia, it says that he is William Shatner's brother, but I saw nothing anywhere in the movie. Like he said that his family was in trouble, so he had to go back, but I didn't hear any dialogue or anything that like even started to establish what his relationship was to anyone else in the movie.
Nothing. Yeah. Nothing mentioned before. Yeah. Yeah. I think though that it was the editing piece. Like I think that there was like, where they go back in time. If that was at the beginning, it would explain things a little bit better.
Absolutely.
That's all. I'm not to dive too in deep with that, but it's just like I think it was just like edited wrong.
Yes.
Start off with that, and then we know how to get there because you use William Shatner in the going back in time footage. Yeah, it was just kind of strange, but
yeah. Well, yeah, and in the first go back in time footage, it was like clearly the guy looks just like William Shatner, but they had not yet established that I guess he was like a future reincarnation of the same person, or like
or like a distant relative.
Yeah, there's very, very little sense to be made of most of this.
Yeah.
But I did think it did some interesting things from a movie making perspective. Like the idea that all of the cult members were, I guess, like the descendants of the original cult members or something, or like they had taken over the bodies of their relatives or something. But the way that they had sort of like the melted faces with the blacked out eyes was just a really creepy visual that I thought was kind of cool because it added a level of horror just around like these kind of almost like more so creatures than people. So it wasn't just like the faceless black robed figures. Like they definitely had faces, and the idea that William Shatner's mom became one of them, I think like added to the horror in a way that we definitely didn't have around the cults in the previous movie.
Yeah. Even though that the makeup done on the actors to take the eyes out, like even though it was like a little gnarly, kind of looked like the first Rocky film, which makes sense for the time. But I gotta say, it was relatively effective too with those empty eyes. Like the first time you see it, it's kind of confusing because you have no idea what the hell is going on. But once you realize, like, oh, like all the followers are like that, it's like, okay, that's kind of gnarly. Like the eyes kind of hollowed out, thing. Just imagine seeing that in real life, just would freak you out.
Yeah, I also like there were a lot of practical effects in this one, and one that I thought was kind of like, I don't really understand why, but all the cultists like bled in that green and pink pastel. So like if they got shot twice, like there would be one stream coming out that was pink and one that was coming out that was like a light green.
Yeah.
And there was no explanation for that whatsoever, but it was a cool visual the way they like worked it in.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I think of is like, man, that must have been cheaper than fake blood during the time. Right. Like, because yet again, we weren't explained shit. So it's just like, you're just kind of guessing. You're like, it's kind of gnarly. Yeah. Maybe they couldn't afford it. I don't know. Yeah. Mob's kind of finicky with their money.
Yeah. In going through my notes, it's mostly just a lot of question marks of me like trying to make sense of what was happening in the scene. But I think just super broad brush, high level, what the story was implied to be was that back in pilgrimy times, there was a cult in like a secret cult in the Pilgrim Village, led by this guy named Corbus. And William Shatner and his wife were members of the cult, and she had like a change of heart and reported them to, the main, I guess, Christian religious leader in the town. And then the townspeople came and, put Corbus to death, and also Shatner and his wife. And there was some kind of book involved where Corbus was keeping the names of the people who had dedicated themselves to Satan, and that was what was given over as evidence. And so now there's been this like generations long kind of reincarnation battle of Corbus and the original cult members against Shatner and his wife's reincarnations. And Shatner and his wife have been sort of tasked with protecting this book, because if Corbus gets it back, somehow that's going to allow the cult to do some sort of ceremony that will give them more power or something. So then there's this family friend maybe, or someone who actually has the book, but then Shatner goes off looking for his mom, who has rejoined the cult, and then he gets captured, and then they're torturing him. And then his brother, according to Wikipedia, and brother's wife or girlfriend come to investigate. And then it all just, like, you're kind of finding out more about the story, and it's this big kind of face-off at this sort of deserted ghost town, Old West style in the middle of the desert. Is that mostly what you took away?
I think that's best. Yeah, better than I could have explained it. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just weird. And there's like a sheriff that is somehow, I guess, like part of the cult. And I don't know. It was really, really hard to follow. Yeah. There were a few cool scenes and kind of some good shots and stuff. But overall, it was mostly incomprehensible. And I cannot explain to you what the Devil's Reign was actually supposed to be.
Oh, well, yeah, I can only tell you from reading. Like,
okay.
After I watched it. But so what I was reading was that the Devil's Reign consisted of all the souls from the original, from the cultists, supposedly including Corbus. Is that his name? Ernest Borgnine?
Corbus.
So supposedly that's what it contained. And so that's why when it was smashed, it all kind of ended for majority of the cultists. But supposedly it was their souls. That's what it was saying. I don't know why or how, but I think in one of the shots where they go back in time, they definitely have that piece. That's what they, like, Ernest has at the beginning. I don't remember, but supposedly souls. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seemed like it was like buried in the chapel, and there was this almost like a lantern, and if you looked in it, you could see like all the souls that were like yelling. And I thought the Devil's Reign was supposed to be like the thing that was keeping them trapped there,
I see what you're saying.
or something. But I still don't understand like what it was or why it mattered. Yeah. Or anyway, so
yeah, I see what you're saying. I was thinking that what that container was the Devil's Reign.
Yeah, and maybe that's what it was. I just in general, it was like the Devil's Reign was the name of the movie, but it also didn't really seem to be the thing that they were like actually after.
Right. Yeah.
They were trying to get the book back to do some sort of ceremony that would give them something that I don't think was ever like clearly articulated. But
no, it not in the film for sure. Definitely was not articulated.
Yeah. But then there was the piece about, so Corbus, it starts this ceremony, and then he becomes this weird like devil sheep, and then he starts using voodoo to burn Shatner's character. And I still like so what's weird to me about this one is I feel like a lot of times in cult movies they give you the beliefs of the cult, and then they lead you towards like, because of those beliefs there's a thing that they're trying to accomplish. And in this one, I didn't really ever feel like I understood what it was they were trying to accomplish, other than the guy wanted the book back, maybe just out of revenge or something. And so it was really hard to follow, or it was hard for me to get like in the rhythm of the movie and to feel like the dread and the horror of it, just because I was so confused the whole time trying to follow along, I think.
Yeah, you can definitely see that. I mean, I think as far as this movie goes, they hit. I mean, it was a cult. At the end of the day, that they were involved with, we don't necessarily. I don't necessarily understand like what exactly the cult was, what exactly got them there, other than revenge, like you were saying. That was the only thing I could think of, based off of Corbus slapping that lady who betrayed him. But as far as it being a cult, like that's what this kind of was in a way. There's definitely like a little bit of hive mentality, but I think when you have film that it's maybe slashers, you kind of get away with bad stories because it's a little bit about the action too. But with this one, it's like cults. Like there's not going to be a ton of action, I don't think. It's more so about like how they got there, why it's there, or why they should stay there, or that information. Is the cult actually bad? Like there are so many things out there, and like this, they just kind of missed the opportunity to do it. But at least there was a cult in it, I guess is where I'm getting at.
And there's some more that I want to get into with how like the cult was portrayed. But one thing I wanted to bring up, one last thing, just kind of in general on like the movie itself. Did you notice the scene where Tom pulls his blue car, like, or teal car in front of like the old church building with like the mountains and the blue sky in the background? There was no reason for you to, other than that it was absolutely beautiful.
Oh,
and
was it?
Like compared to everything else in the movie, it was just like a perfect like postcard type lined up perfect shot. And I was just like, well, where is this cinematography in all of the rest of the film? But like, I don't know if they just like rented a better camera for that one, or if they just got the angle just right. The natural lighting made it look a lot better, or what. Yeah. But that was one where like it caught my attention, and then I like rewound it just to watch it again because that scene looked so good.
I definitely see that. The whole scenery of this, including the town that the cult was in, it reminded me of High Plains Drifters.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah, definitely.
Like open and kind of barren a little bit, you know,
like old school Western, kind of that sense of isolation. And sure.
I don't know this, but I'd be willing to bet that this was like, there were definitely Western films filmed around this time in that location.
Yeah.
It had to have been.
Yeah. So that was The Devil's Rain plot in a nutshell. But let's get back to business and talk more specifically about cults.
Yeah.
I think there were definitely some similarities between this and The Black Cat. The cult was ostensibly satanic in both, and both had a cult leader who was like the high priest that they all trusted to be the one to lead the rituals and such. But also, I think that in this movie, which was made after Charles Manson and the Manson family dominated the news in 1969, it had to have been somewhat influenced by more modern views of cults. And I think that there was some evidence of that. Like, one aspect was that part of the horror was that you had people who had defied the cult and were now in danger from it. So, like, that social control aspect, I think, was part of the story here and part of the horror. And the difference is that the cult wasn't this just like foreign, exotic, mysterious thing. It was something very well known by the main characters who were being targeted. So it was almost like more scary because they had been on the inside before. And that's not a perspective that we got at all when in The Black Cat, you know, the cult was just kind of this like other thing that sort of drove the plot forward. So it was almost like this, you're getting a view of the cult kind of from the inside, and you definitely were getting, I think, a little bit of a view too that may be more accurate with the time, was that everything in the movie, at least, you weren't scared of the devil, you were scared of Corvus. And I think that difference between, it wasn't like what the cult was trying to conjure that was the scary thing. It was like the person who was in charge of the cult. And granted, he had some supernatural ability to turn into a goat or something, but also, like, it was really about him. Like, it was really about the cult leader that was kind of the central figure, and not a thing that the cult was ushering in. And so I don't think that this movie, I'm not trying to draw parallels between the way that the zombie genre developed over time and the way this developed over time, except to say that, you know, for a while, zombies were like just kind of this foreign, kind of exotic thing that were the result of voodoo, and they just kind of represented like the unknown and danger generally. And then it became to be like a much more real threat that sort of drove people together, but basically came on to take a much more defined definition in public culture and in movies over time. And I feel like what we're seeing here is that transition from like the way cults were portrayed in The Black Cat into them being portrayed more like they would in what you and I think of when we think of cults in horror movies now.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And it's almost like a little bit of a relief that the focus was not so much on the evil power of it, but like on, like you were saying, like on Corvus, like he was the main bad person in it. It was just kind of nice, because I feel like a lot of times with cult horror movies, like that could almost be like an easy way out to get your point across. Like at the end, it's just like all hell breaks loose, and next thing you know, like an opening to hell comes up, and then people are getting, or dying or whatever, whatever the case is. I think that this is a more realistic approach to what cults are really kind of like, in a way, minus the eyes, minus like the supernatural. It's like
in the pink blood.
Yeah, in the pink and green blood. But like that's definitely, that's how I personally see it. Like, so that's why this one is cool in my book. I feel like the fear of the film is more so on the person than the actual supernatural.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it gets a little pass, because it's like, cool, that's how it would probably be in real life too,
Yeah. dude would just sprout horns, start burning you with a voodoo doll, and it would all go to hell.
I think it's more so like, oh, we're going to believe this really crazy story that happened a long time ago from this really crazy person that's running this cult.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
We all came from aliens. Whatever. Fuck off. Sorry. It's like I've been having arguments with cultists. I definitely haven't, but that's what I was just portraying.
Yeah. If they ever bring Reddit back online, maybe you can talk to some there. But
by God.
Yeah. So coming back to our list from last week about the 4 attributes of cults, the first one was authoritarian control. It said cultism hinges on encouraging maximum dependency, and the people must feel incapable of living an individual life outside of kind of the cult, and also having like generally, a worshipful attitude towards the group's authoritarian leader. It kind of seemed like Corbus was really at the center of whatever force was keeping them all together. Like, they didn't seem to have entirely free will because their souls were still stuck or something in the Devil's Reign. But in general, there was a time in the beginning where 2 people left the cult and then things went kind of bad for them. And everyone else has sort of spent the rest of their existence across time, like chasing them down. And so I think that that's kind of, really fits into that the cult is like a single unit, and everyone feels like the consequences of trying to leave that unit would be bad. And those are being reinforced by persecuting somebody who has. So that I feel like is much more in line in this movie than like what we saw last time.
Yeah. And also, you're going to be less likely to leave if you don't have any damn eyeballs.
Well, that's true. You could trip over anything.
So I feel like a lot of times with cults, it's you have the fear of leaving. It's like the fear of the unknown, that you won't have your support or whatever. I don't know if that's true. It's just a guess. But this one is like, this son of a bitch got both my eyes just for getting in.
Yeah.
What do I get having to get out?
Yeah, no joke.
Yeah.
I can think of a pair of something else I wouldn't want him to take.
You're dang right. Hands.
Yep. Toes.
Mm-hmm.
So
not the big toe! Not the big toe!
What's in the box? Yeah. Another thing on the list was extremist beliefs. So I think that's kind of like obvious from everything we've talked about here. Those beliefs were not clearly articulated at any point, but they were sure extreme. But the third one, I think, again, fits more with this one, and that's isolation from society. And what's interesting to me about that is I think with this one, they were almost more hidden than isolated. And in the beginning, like when you go back to the flashbacks, there definitely was a certain sense of isolation, but it wasn't like they were living somewhere else. It's just they had to keep what they were doing really, really secret. So it was almost more of like a social isolation, or like I don't know, having to keep their actual beliefs secret in a very like strict society. And then over time, they were isolated just because they were off kind of out in this desert town away from everybody while they figured out how to get that book back. But a thing that I hadn't ever really stopped to think about was this idea of the cult existing in a day-to-day society, keeping up the appearance of being normal members, but still being isolated and like meeting in secret and having their names in this book and going through these rituals and things. And so that was another one that stood out to me as a thing that was sort of brought up in this movie that wasn't even really approached at all in the last one.
Yeah, there's definitely like the evolution that comes, which is welcoming for sure. I feel like out of Black Cat and the Devil's Reign, this one was more in line to what we have nowadays too. So, minus the story.
Yeah, and then the last one we already got into a little bit, but the idea of the veneration of a single individual. And in this one, it was really obvious that even though they were all like, quote unquote, worshiping the devil, really Ernest Borgnine's character was the one that had all the power, was the threat, was really the person kind of being worshipped more so than anything else. And that, I think, is very, very common as far as like leading to where we ended up with cults today. Is really the cult almost always starts around some idea or set of beliefs, but what it culminates in is sort of elevating this single individual is the one who, in light of that, somehow is justified as being set apart from everyone else and being deserving of everyone's worship.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's all I had on my notes for this one. Did you have anything else you wanted to get into?
I don't think so.
Cool.
It was all right. I didn't hate myself after watching it.
Yeah, I mean, this one was like fun from a this is a ridiculous movie perspective. Anyway, this one I know was kind of a lot to get through, but next week we're going to come back with a movie that I'm pretty sure we've both seen. I know I have on multiple occasions, and that really is much more in the vein of like, okay, this matches what we think of the modern depiction of cults. Mm-hmm. And now that that's been established, we can do something creative and new with it. And so I'm really excited to get into that and to kind of dig into it. But I thought these first two were really interesting to have on the list just to kind of see the progression and how we ended up at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that if we had to... I would have picked these movies again for this section too. Like, yeah. It always starts off. We've realized with any of the sections we've done, like it always starts off like it's old school, but it develops. That's what we want to see and learn about it. So,
yep. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com. Or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.